process it, or it's really damaging to the planet to recycle it.
Yeah.
Like it causes more harm than if you just let it sit in the landfill.
Right, but that's
try and reprocess.
But that's in most cases. For example, the city of San Francisco is now up to about 90% of recycling and composting and reusing its waste stream.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Really
and so for example, I brought a few examples like plastic, which is a petroleum product, or plastic bags. So in Israel, they actually made a law last year that says that if you want to get a plastic bag at a supermarket, you need to pay 10 agurot, which is the equivalent of about 3 cents. Okay. Now
a lot of stores have also implemented.
Yeah. Now on its own, it's
no, but like in the shop,
it's not that people are so concerned about that amount of money. It's more that if you say to people, well, you need to pay to use this bag, even though the payment amount is insignificant for most people.
Yeah.
But to say to them to pay, that you need to pay, so they've now done a study that shows that Israelis are using 80% fewer bags, plastic bags.
Wow. Really?
Okay.
They all bring their like.
I know.
Yeah.
The big one that they did.
Imagine if they tried it.
Yeah, right. So I want to just continue with a few other trees teachings. Yeah.
Everyone was more mindful of their usage of like plastic and oil than like we saving the world, because like I think we're still using more people are using the plastic. Even if we're careful, like ultimately at some point we'll get the destruction, which will be later on.
So I don't know what's going to be later on, but all I know is that there's a important Jewish idea that the individual has agency and that what we do matters. So and I think based on these teachings that being mindful of one's footprint on creation and caring for creation, this is God's creation, that's a Jewish value, and as a result, my composting and riding a bicycle instead of owning a car and trying to be vegan, all of these things are things that are consistent with the values that I see in our tradition. And whether what it's going to mean globally and 50 years from now, I don't know. But my grandchildren will ask me, well, Zadie, what did you do when there was still time? What were you doing, Zadie? Like, you saw it coming. You were on that ship and you saw the iceberg ahead. Like, Zadie, what were you doing? And, can I answer from a place of truth and a place of integrity? Because it's actually not just my grandchildren, that I think that at the end of the day, or at the end of my days, I'm gonna go to the transcendent world, and the one living God is gonna ask me that question. And so I gotta do what I can in this incarnation. We're incarnated here in this moment. So we gotta. Arundhati Roy said, she's an Indian author. She said, all we can do is fight specific wars in specific ways. In other words, we.
Indian accent?
No, we can't. We can't do everything, but we can do anything. Okay, so that's yeah.
I love that. It's a practical way to solve issues.
So look,
Have you ever been to an Asian country?
Yeah. So there is.
What do they do?
So there's different. If you look at your ecological footprint, toilet paper and tissues are sort of, in our society, essential things. If you want to talk about reducing your ecological footprint, there's probably 100 ways you could do it without having to address toilet paper and tissues for sneezing. For example, napkins, or even washing your hands. So if you want to talk about so that you can bring. I had my chavruta in yeshiva carried with him a handkerchief, and when he would go to the bathroom or wash his hands on eating bread, instead of using a paper towel, a tissue to dry his hands, or instead of using an air dryer, he would take the handkerchief on his side and he would dry his hands with that. Okay? So that's an example of how we can, at a meal, there are certain ways to do that. Okay?
Yeah, we should buy Mayanot towels.
They would be getting some water.
Does it do that?
You want to see that.
But the water has a naturally renewing cycle with the earth.
Yeah.
The way the water works and the way the earth cycles water is way more natural than
Okay, so
also, you have much more technology too that reinforces that impact versus like recycling, like costs a lot of money, still harms the environment.
Yeah.
It doesn't have like such 100% success rate. Like water you can purify till it's so pure you have to reintroduce minerals to it.
Yeah, good. So water is a renewable resource, and it doesn't have to go to a landfill or a garbage dump here in the land of Israel when we dispose of it. Okay, that's another aspect of our holy use, which is how can we, part of the garbage that we have here in Jerusalem is deposited in the West Bank, in garbage dumps in the West Bank, and other is brought to the Negev desert. But like, what does it mean to live in Jerusalem, the land of Israel today, and that our garbage goes into the land? That's something also this is the palace of the king, and we need to treat the land like the palace of the king. Okay, so speaking of which, in Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 19, this is the verse in the Torah that is cited as perhaps the most ecological verse in the Torah, which also relates to trees. When you besiege a city for many days to wage war against it, to capture it, you shall not destroy its trees by wielding an axe against them, for you may eat from them, but you shall not cut them down. Is the tree of the field a person to go into the siege before you? However, a tree is not a food tree. You may destroy and cut down, and you shall build bulwarks or siege equipment against the city that makes war with you until its submission. So this verse, these two verses are the basis of a prohibition in the Jewish tradition called Bal Tashchit, do not destroy or waste. Okay, so you already learned about it. Great. So Rashi, the next source, explains that the word ki here functions in the sense of perhaps. Is the tree of the field perhaps a person that it should be included in the besieged town because of you, to suffer the tribulations of hunger and thirst like the people of the city? Why should you destroy it? In other words, Rashi says, you're waging war on a city, you're trying to siege the city, and you're trying to perhaps make equipment to scale the city, making it out of wood or a battering ram. So, there are fruit trees in the city. So you don't need to use the fruit trees. You can use the non-fruit trees. And why should you cut down fruit trees, which is sort of like a vengeful act, when you don't need to do that? The trees are not combatants in the war. Okay? So this prohibition against cutting fruit trees in wars was extended by the rabbis of the Talmud as an overarching prohibition against any type of waste or destruction. And it's not just about trees, it's about electricity, it's about clothing, about wasting clothing. I'll give you an example in regards to energy use, that the Ben Ish Chai, who was one of the leading rabbis in Iraq about 150 years ago, he was asked by a congregant, well, I go to the bathroom at night and live on the second story of my house, and I need to go down a ladder, and I usually light a candle with 2 wicks. But I don't actually need both wicks in order to see, and I can manage with 1 wick. Am I transgressing the prohibition of Bal Tashchit when I light 2 wicks instead of 1?
Does it give more light?
It does, but the person said that they don't need the second wick. In other words,
Why are they can manage. Just not light it?
Well, because it's sort of just more luxurious. Okay? And the rabbi said that yes, this person does violate the prohibition of Bal Tashchit in lighting more light than he needs. Okay, so we live in a time of vehicles that have, 300 horsepower, which means that it's powered by the equivalent energy of being pulled by 300 horses. And the lights that we live with today are actually quite abundant. To produce this amount of light in the room in pre-modern times might require 100 or 200 oil lamps, the small oil lamps that people had. And so only a very wealthy person would have a room as well lit as this room at night. Okay, so it's also just something to think about of, am I using this wisely? Am I using this in a conservationist way? Am I using it, to the extent that I need it and not beyond that, and not coming to the place of waste? Yeah.
Is there a, I'm saying, go from a textile perspective and from a philosophical perspective? When we say we try to prevent wasting things, are we trying to prevent wasting things that have some kind of end, meaning it's not an unlimited resource? Or are we trying to prevent waste in all things, including things that are unlimited resources?
So the only thing that's unlimited in the world is God. Everything else on this planet is a finite resource. Well, even so, first of all, fossil fuels, which is the main energy source for people in the world today, are actually finite. We may not run it.
But something like water falling is not or solar power or.
That's like kinetic energy or solar power.
Okay, but
Those kind of energies unlimited resources.
Okay, so for example,
Yeah.
So even solar energy, it's okay. The sun's energy, from our perspective, is virtually unlimited. However, to convert the sun's energy to electricity actually requires a lot of work. We need to mine silicon and other metals in order to produce solar panels. We have to do major industrial processes that are mostly in Vietnam and Malaysia and China and Korea to produce the solar panels. Then we need to transport those solar panels around the world and have people install them and repair them. And so to use solar energy it requires, it's a use of resources, of human resources.
But everything uses resources. It's impossible not to.
Yes, and so Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch says in relation to this commandment of Bal Tashchit that the spiritual root of it's not only of like if you're at a waterfall and you're wasting, like, well, if I'm at a waterfall, like, how can I be wasting? But Rabbi Hirsch says that the deeper teaching here is that it's a spiritual teaching, which is that God is in control and God does not want us to waste. To waste is to do something that's egoistic. It's to assert our dominance, our control over something that really belongs to God.
But is it wasting if it's unlimited?
So again, because everything we use is not technically unlimited, okay, because the physical reality is finite by definition. So we are wasting something that's finite, even if it's seemingly limitless. Okay, but with 7.5 billion people on Earth and 80 billion farmed animals, so there's actually, like, resources are getting scarcer because there's so many more land animals and farmed fish than there were even 50 or 100 years ago. Okay, anyway, maybe we'll talk about it a little more afterward, because yeah.
So, like, I understand not wanting to use paper plates and stuff, like, especially like if you're in a family and like you're having a meal with 4 people or 10 people. What about like when you have Shabbat dinner for 180 people, or Shabbat 500 for 600-700 people? Like, like that's a lot of dishes to do, and like it would be great to do all like dishes, but like, who has the time to do 600 dishes?
Even if you have 10 little kids in your house.
Yeah.
Very hard.
Right.
When does the mom have the time to do dishes?
Okay, so look, a Shabbat meal with 500 people. Most Shabbat meals that we go to don't involve 500 people.
Well, like,
okay?
It's 180 every week at my Shabbat.
Okay, so Okay,
Wow.
so it could be that that there could be a rotation of people, that the dirty dishes go in bins, and that there are volunteers or paid staff that want to practice the Jewish value of caring for God's creation, and that after Shabbat they take those 180 dishes and a team of people, whether they're volunteer or paid, wash those dishes.
Yeah,
So it's
at summer
possible.
camp, we had like 200, 300 people, and we had real dishes every meal, and there was like dogs.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Our kitchen's tiny at my house.
Oh,
It's tiny.
Okay, so I want to finish because
Let's gather all together.
as Rabbi Tarfon said, the time is short, the work is great.
workers are lazy.
The workers are lazy, the master is unrelenting, the reward is tremendous. He's talking in relation to Torah. And I want to just finish with a story that's told by the Nobel laureate Toni Morrison. She said this in her acceptance speech of the UN of the Nobel Peace Prize, Nobel Literature Prize. And she said that a young boy came to an elder woman sage with a bird in his hands, and he was trying to trick the sage, and he said to her, "Is the bird in my hands alive or dead?" And so the woman thought to herself for a few minutes, and she said, and she realized that if she said that the bird was dead, then the boy would open his hands and the bird would fly away, and he would prove her wrong, that she said it was dead, but it's actually alive and it flew away, and she's wrong. And that if she said that the bird is alive, the boy would close his hands and crush the small bird, and that either way she would be proven wrong. So what did the elder sage say? So she said to the boy, "I don't know whether the bird in your hands is alive or dead. All I know is that the fate of the bird is in your hands." And that's the situation that we're in today, which is God has blessed us with tremendous power that is increasing by the year. And the spiritual question that we're facing is, do we use this power of industrial technology and the tremendous energy unleashed by fossil fuels? Are we going to use it b'tikkun, in a repaired state, in a conscious state, in a spiritual state, for the elevation of all humanity and all species? That's the question I'd like to leave with you this Tu Bishvat, and to wish you a Shana Tova and a Happy New Year for the trees.
Thank you.
Thank you.